Welcome to NCBA's Cattlemen's Call podcast with host Lane Nordland.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Cattlemen's Call podcast. Lane Nordland with you here today, and we're going to be discussing wildfire. It's something we all dread, but it's a reality that we all face on our farms and ranches out across the countryside, and we've seen quite a lot of impact here in 2026 alone. Just to share a stat with you, 3.2 million acres burned so far in the first half of this year. That's a 157% increase over the previous 10-year average. And when natural disaster occurs, neighbors help neighbors, producers from other states help them as well. And it's an emotional topic, but it's also a very bright topic sometimes too, just to show the resilience of producers and communities. And even if we may disagree on some things, we're always going to help neighbors out. And so I'm not excited to talk about wildfire per se, but I'm excited to be joined by Laura Field with the Nebraska Cattlemen and Kenny Rogers. You're the policy chair. We had the vice policy chair on our last podcast.
Yes,
but both of you have experienced wildfire and help organize relief efforts and whatnot. And we're having this conversation during the summer business meeting in Denver for NCBA. But, when we look at that figure, 3.2 million acres have burned so far here this year. And there's fires going on right here in Colorado. Kenny, where you're from, we look out the big picture windows and you can't see the mountains. You can't even see downtown Denver. But, several 100,000 acres burned in Nebraska, and we see these images of the sandhills and the stories, and it's not fun to see them. And you've been there firsthand, and I know you've shared that on our radio network, the stories as well with our team. But what have the last few months been like from the Nebraska Cattleman perspective, as someone that's been boots on the ground, that has seen the fear in people's eyes as well? What has this journey been like?
It has been a long one, and it's going to be a long one. It's been an interesting thing to watch, be a part of. Like you said, none of us want to talk about it. The first significant fire started on March 13th in Nebraska. And by the time it was done with that round, which we always remind ourselves we're not out of fire season yet, almost 1 million acres have burned across the state. And it has been the most significant wildfire event in the state of Nebraska, largest in history, one of the top 10 in the country. And so when it started, perfect conditions, super dry, a lot of forage left over from last year. People were really excited about spring, going out to grass. And so, it has been in the moments terrifying, scary, and then to see how people have come together and rallied around each other from across the country and across the world. It's just incredible. But we know the road has been long so far. It's going to be long. And so and the main thing that people always say is what do we need? And we need rain. That's the main thing all of us need. But it's been incredible to be a part of, very humbling to be able to connect the dots and help people get through some of these things.
Now, Kenny, you're a producer here in Colorado as well. You've seen firsthand fires this year. Was it the Heartstrong fire?
Heartstrong fire, yes, was in just a few miles from our house. That was, I can't recall, it's been 10 or so years ago. But tell everybody we're overachievers because that fire burned roughly around 37,000 acres in about 8 hours. I mean, it went so fast it would literally suck the fire around the backside of a hill. And there were, I don't know how many rural fire departments, probably over 20 responded to that. And some of those firemen that were fighting the fire suddenly had it behind them when it was in front of them. But when that occurred, they started drifting the cattle. Many of those cattle, once it kind of moved out of the rangelands, were still on winter cornstalk forage yet, and of course just hot wire fence, and it'd melt the plastic insulators, drop the wire, and the cattle would escape. So there were people just showing up. That's what happens. I mean, the phone tree lights up with the cell phones, and people started accumulating. So they started drifting those cattle, and logical place for them to be was they ended up at our place. We were kind of the first significant set of working corrals that they could come to. So they were gathering cattle, brought them towards us. And I we didn't count exactly, roughly 1,500 to 1,600 head of mixed livestock, anything from yearling stockers up to cows. Brought them in there to our place with that fire. But like I said, it was pretty much over and done with, just a couple days.
And you talk about that response to our rural fire districts and companies. They're all volunteers.
Yeah.
They're producers themselves. How important is it for folks? You're a volunteer leader. You help run an organization of volunteer leaders. Those are volunteer positions. And it just seems, as we've seen in agriculture and small communities, it's hard to get people to volunteer sometimes. And whether it's for the local cattlemen's board or the fire department, how important is it? And what have you done? What have your neighbors done to show that appreciation and maybe spread awareness to that these younger folks may be moving back to these communities that, hey, we need you to be a part of this system too.
One of the things that I've spoken with, I know some of the guys who were on our rural fire board there, and I said, there's always a shortage. I mean, we're a rural community and we're not funded like many places as well as they probably would like to be. I said, what are some things you need? And, can we help with that some way, shape, or form? Either help with grant proposals or something, so there's always usually it's equipment, whatever. But I've asked them on that. And then of course the response to, and Laura probably saw it most recently there is, it destroys a lot of fence lines. And where we're pretty much in my country, all deeded lands, everyone has their fence lines and the wood posts go and, you got to rebuild a lot of fence. Mm-hmm. So, there's been, our local cattleman has helped procure, some loads of fence posts, and then other communities will donate as well. I mean, I've donated back out to other communities and in return, we've had it donated to us.
That's an interesting point on the fencing, because the donations really help a lot, because we know a mile of fence is not cheap. Mm-hmm. But does insurance cover some of that? I mean, that's so many people have gone through this. That's a question I actually don't know. What happens if when you're doing that, I guess, any insight on that?
Yeah. From the producers we've talked to, I think it varies depending on where you are, what you have. And also probably the bigger piece of that equation is the federal programs that open up after fires happen. And that's one of the things that I think is a huge advantage for those of us in state cattlemen's associations and working with National Cattlemen's Beef Association. There are ways that we can access those federal leaders, and because sometimes having to wait 6 weeks just to be told you can move a tree that fell on a fence, you can't wait that long. And so a lot of that part I think comes from there. But we've been told by people, I think some people have different insurance plans on those wide open spaces, mostly on the sandhills. I'm not sure that's the case in all of them, but it's just that's a long process that can be really frustrating.
And you think the tens of thousands of miles of cedar post fence out across the West that have been there for so many generations of producers. And in every area that's gone through this, we've all seen the images. We've all gone through it. It just, it takes me back to when I was little watching the Return to Lonesome Dove. And the fire scene at Clara's horse ranch or whatever. And when you're little, it's just like, why are they so scared of fire? It's just like 4 or 5 year old me, like remembering that. And then when you live through it, when you're talking to people that have been through it, it is emotional. And so, Laura, what have been some of the conversations or maybe some of the stories that have stuck out? I know so many of our friends that are tuning in have seen images from Nebraska, but what are some of these stories or conversations or just things that have stuck out to you?
Yeah. I think that fear part, I have heard so many parents of young children talk about how just seeing a fire in a fireplace after their kids have gone through this, being totally afraid, or a Black Hawk helicopter dumping a bucket of water on your house. And then it's like, why did that happen? And for some of the places in Nebraska, the fires flared up multiple times. So there were people who would get to go home and then have to leave again. I think that is incredibly traumatic. And not knowing with how fast they were moving, most of the first fire that started out, and we called it the Morrill Fire in Nebraska, it was at night. The wind was blowing 70 miles an hour. You don't even know what's coming. We had people share text messages with us of their husband was in town saying, get the kids in the car, get out. And so I think that that's the piece of, and then just having to wait till the next day to see, can we go back? It took weeks. We were fortunate to be so close to Colorado, and the Rocky Mountain Incident Team came out and it really helped command those first few fires. Listening to them 2 weeks in, not even being able to measure the perimeter because there were so many hot spots still flaring up. But to hear people talk about that, the fear, and then to get up in a plane, fly over and look at it, and yet to still be able to say, I'm alive, my neighbors are alive, our house is still there. We might have lost everything, but we're all here together, is the hope in that. And I think that's the early on part for us that we underestimated, the mental toll it took, and talking to people about schools opening up their doors saying, we're going to bring counselors in here. What can we do to help? That's the piece that often gets overlooked, but is so important throughout this whole process.
And Kenny, same, just to the western Colorado. What has that been like too? Just hearing from your fellow producers, and then the cleanup and sorting cattle, and the mess that comes with that, and brand inspections, and finding a place for them.
There goes a certain tragedy. I mean, we just last week lost 3 firefighters on the ground. Yesterday, or perhaps the day before now, a helicopter pilot was killed, fighting these fires. There's that human side of it, very tragic. We lose human life on that. And, you speak of brand inspection, going back to when we had that Heartstrong fire, it took nearly a full week of sorting, brand inspecting, cutting cattle aside and hauling them off. And one thing that sticks in my mind about that were the cattle who drifted in, where the cattle had been burnt severely in the fire. And as I'm kind of guiding, okay, I can't hold any more in this pen. Let's, move some more. There was actually had another neighbor who was out euthanizing, who was shooting the severely burned cattle. And to this day, I can see burned hooves, burned udders, blinded eyes, scalded skin. It's just, and that stuck in my mind so much. We had a fire just a couple of years ago. I thought it looked like it was coming upon us, so I kind of headed in that direction. I could see the smoke. No, it was just large enough. It looked closer than it was. But when I got there, the number of people had showed up, and I said, well, is anyone out there getting the cattle out of the head of this? And they said, well, no, because it's so-and-so's property. And I just looked at them and says, I will not see another head of cattle burnt. And I headed in there. And by the time I got over to the extreme fence of this pasture, the fire was coming towards me, and the cattle that were in the pasture where the fire was were bunched up against the fence. I figured I'd rather ask for forgiveness later than permission now, and I cut the wire, and those cattle got out of there. But I just, like I said, based upon what I'd seen earlier, I was not going to let any of them get burnt. So there's that side of it as well. But there's just, like Laura said, it sticks with you forever. You don't perhaps think of it so much at the time, but boy, it doesn't take much to trigger those memories.
Laura, you mentioned obviously when emergency aid is available, but it takes a lot of communication. When you're waiting on the government, sometimes it can be delayed, or there's the fun part of the government. But we're talking about animal health, animal welfare with this too. We're talking about feed. Let's talk about that response that both producers in Nebraska and Colorado, and truly anywhere where these disasters happened, what that was like with people coming to help sort cattle or do the most horrible job you got to do, but you got to take care of these livestock and make sure they're not suffering. Yeah, we're all this is not fun, is it? But it's an important conversation, guys. But just that human element, though, of the support of hay coming in, of the fencing supplies coming in from all over. Yeah. What was that like to just see a little glimmer of light at the end of this dark tunnel?
It's it's incredible. It's almost overwhelming, but in such a good way. I was thinking back about this yesterday too. A lot of these fires started right at the beginning of National Ag Week, and we were really struggling with wanting to promote agriculture in National Ag Week. And I finally sat down with some of my team and I said, "This is what agriculture is. This is who we are. We help each other out. We're there for each other." In the areas of Nebraska that had those early fires back in March, we estimate there were about 45,000 head of cattle out there, very sparsely populated with people, but a lot of cattle. I mean, Nebraska is 4-to-1 cattle to people anyway. And so all of a sudden you have all these cattle, many of them who were in trouble, many of them who had smoke inhalation. I heard these stories of the fires moved so fast over the top of them that calves couldn't bawl. It was calving season. Calves couldn't bawl because their vocal cords had been burned. I mean, just like, gut-wrenching things that you think about as you say your prayers every night. But then all of a sudden, within hours, the phone is ringing. I had not even gone to bed, and the phone rang from one of our feedlot members in eastern Nebraska, and he said, "Call the governor's office. I'm putting trucks on the road with hay. I don't care if I get tickets, but call them and tell them to make the waivers." Within hours, those were done. Our Nebraska Emergency Management Association, just tremendous. I got phone calls. The incident command center opened. People were up in airplanes. And from South Carolina to California to Oregon to Pennsylvania, you just cannot imagine. And there was our trucking association said it was right during all the Iran crisis. Their fuel was ridiculously high. They said, "We'll match 50 cents on the dollar up to a certain amount for fuel." It was just people saying, "What can we do? We may not be able to help. We may not be able to build a mile of fence." But, all of a sudden, every acre of ranchers' grassland was burned. Somebody's got to feed cattle the next morning. I had a guy call our office and say, "I don't know how I'm going to feed the horses out." And he called back a few hours later and said, "I woke up and there was somebody dumping hay over the fence." It's truly the best of people, and not everybody knew what to do. Like, where do we drop things? Where are the points of order? We didn't know, but we said, "Just go, head that way," and they did.
And maybe let's expand on that too, just whether it's through the Nebraska Cattlemen or through the state or the regional responses, and just having a place for how the donations were made, but the logistics.
Yep.
That's a lot of country.
Yeah.
To get covered.
We got on the phone with our Department of Agriculture, who stood up a website immediately, and we said, "Look, we're going to point people in your direction." They had a spreadsheet. And the other thing that I think no one thinks about in the moment, but it's so important, I asked my staff, I said, "This is one of those things where that other duties as assigned comes in, because this is none of our jobs, but it's all of our jobs." And so we were insistent that we call anybody who said, "We'll take supplies, we'll hand them out." The last thing you want is to be taken advantage of during a time like this. So we were trying to make sure that, we called every sale barn, every feed supply store, and they said, "Yep, send them our way. We're not sure where we're going to put stuff." And many people in those early days said, "Look, my neighbor has it worse than me. I don't need hay. I don't need supplies." And then a month later realized, "I don't have anything to feed any of these cattle." So that evolution over time, and it was just last week that Secretary Rollins did the disaster declaration for those fires. So that takes time too. It's hugely important. It opens up a lot of doors, but those were processes that we just had to keep telling people, we got to wait on this. And we're going to get there, but it takes some time. But working with those government agencies, so important to have those relationships during time like this.
Kenny, same, whether it's Colorado Livestock Association, Colorado Cattlemen's Association, and working with the state. What was that like? And what has that been like in the past? And what are some maybe improvements you've seen over time too?
Well, I think the biggest thing is kind of what Laura was alluding to, is just there's a real need for somebody to try to coordinate relief, because all of a sudden, you got people jumping up and say, "Hey, I got a load of fence posts, I got a load of hay, I got this," and somebody to coordinate. Okay, here's a spot you can go. This guy's volunteered; he'll unload hay. You can stockpile posts at this location. And it was ironic to me, because I've donated, I don't know how many times, probably half dozen, whole semi-load of hay and gone to various locations. And nearly each and every time they offered to pay for the hay. Mm-hmm. And I said, "No, you're not doing that, because it could be my turn in the pickle barrel next." Mm-hmm. But I think the assistance through the state groups is basically just someone to start to line out where to go to drop off your donation, where to go if you need assistance. You can go, locally in those areas, and just kind of a clearinghouse of information. But, along with that too was every time I would, be involved with that, all of a sudden here's somebody bringing in, they pop open the trunk of their car and it's loaded with cases of bottled water. Mm-hmm. Somebody shows up and they've got 4 dozen hamburgers that a restaurant had donated. Mm-hmm. The communities do take care of their own. They're small rural communities. They step up pretty quickly.
Well, guys, I want to talk about the impact management may be working towards trying to prevent the catastrophes at hand, and again, the resilience of it. But we're going to just take a quick moment and pause and be joined by a conversation with our friends at the Noble Research Institute. We're going to learn more about some grazing opportunities and management as well, but we're going to be back with Laura and Kenny right after this. As we continue our conversations today about wildfire, joining us is Travis Jones at the Noble Research Institute. And Travis, when we think about the Noble Research Institute, we think about a lot of grazing opportunities, soil health, and helping our landscapes and ecosystems. And sometimes wildfire does get pushed to the back burner until it is present or until drought occurs. So when we think about the pre-planning and contingency aspect of preparing for wildfire, what are some of those key things that you and the Noble team work with landowners on to really put this top of mind throughout the year? And of course, when you are looking at grazing rotations and bringing this land back to where it really needs to be?
No, excellent question, Lane. So, our main focus is on planning, right? So being able to, one, identify those factors that are going to help us mitigate that risk, and then be able to actually use those in a management decision, under crisis. And so, it's a famous quote, everybody's got a plan until you get hit in the mouth. And so, having the plan is only part of it. We like to do and talk in our courses about establishing decision points, right? Those are those decision points we make. Those if this happens, then I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. So if a fire starts on mountain X, then I'm going to do A, B, and C, right? And so even just being able to identify some of those ahead of time, will be able to help folks mitigate that risk.
And of course, we're all cattle producers, but there are a lot of other livestock species out there that can play into wildfire planning as well. What is that aspect like, working with producers of all livestock as well?
So when we thought about this topic, being able to utilize a small ruminant, something that's going to focus on some browse, and what we're talking about there mainly is to reduce or restructure that fuel load. So those browsing animals are going to be able to take some of that fuel from ground fire only, and reduce its impact for it to get up into some aerial fuels, and that mainly impacts the ability of suppression crews to be able to work effectively with those fuels. So, once we get fire up, its potential for spotting and firebrands goes a long way.
Now, when we're looking at grazing as a part of these conversations, what density are we looking at in truly trying to trample down potential fire lines or breaks during wildfires, or prevention as well?
No, very, very good question. I think a lot of that, I would kind of hesitate to give a hard and fast number on exact pounds per acre. But, being able to use a high stock density and really use those livestock as a tool just to get that trample effect. Now, whether that's around ranch headquarters, maybe that is on the backside on a fire break already established, or maybe it's in, kind of a larger context where you're looking at just reducing total fuel, to help those suppression efforts if something were to ever get started on your place.
And Travis, as folks look at what they can do, not only to help prevent wildfire and manage our forages and our grasses out there, but what are some other resources that Noble Research Institute can truly help landowners and land operators really excel and put so much land health at the top of mind of any agriculture ranch business plan?
Oh, that's very good. So I would lead lead producers, to our education products. Again, some of this stuff I've talked about in our pre-planning is brought up in our business of grazing class, where we really talk about, getting those things that are most important, either opportunities or risks, being able to get those identified and then be able to make a management decision on top of that. As far as prevention, maybe even more local context, we may want to steer people toward, those ready, set, go fire evacuation protocol. That's pretty common. There's a lot of fire districts that are starting to use that now. And I think for producers that are just getting into the idea of looking at this and starting to plan for it, that's some very good resources.
Well, again, a lot of resources and education for producers. Check out Noble Research Institute. They have fantastic social media as well. Some great series on their YouTube channel highlighting so many producers in the countryside as well. Check that out. And Travis, we want to thank you for joining us here today, sharing a few tips, and hopefully folks will follow up on how they can implement some of these practices on their operations. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Lane. Appreciate it very much.
And with that, friends, we want to thank our friends at Noble Research Institute for joining us here today and helping you bring this wildfire conversation to wherever you enjoy podcasts. Now, let's get back to our conversation with Kenny and Laura on the impacts of these recent fires impacting ranchers across the West. Again, coming back here today, a big shout out to our friends at the Noble Research Institute for more on what they do to provide opportunities and learning opportunities for producers in the countryside. Make sure and check them out and all their educational events that occur out across the nation as well. Well, Laura and Kenny are with us here today, and we're talking about the fires that have had a big impact on Nebraska and Colorado, and will have a lasting impact on the memories of producers. And as we look at this, Kenny, from a herd management perspective to maybe grazing strategy, how does fire make you look at things differently out on that grass that we're growing and managing?
Well, it's one of those things. I can't say that to prevent fire, I don't think you could ever prevent it out there, but you try to, based upon previous experiences, have some kind of a contingency plan. One of the things that we've tried to do just with our ranch is to have, because chances are you're not going to burn the whole thing up. I mean, there have been instances, where some guys literally got burned out of a grazing season. Maybe we'll lose a pasture or two, So we've tried to come up with a strategy to where we can have that emergency supply of grass. And if we end up not using it, then we'll rotate to it the following year. So kind of a rotational scheme in that regards. We want to have some place that we can go with our own cattle. And, is that a community-wide response? Most guys are probably utilizing all they have. We're fortunate that we're able to have just a small amount. Like I said, we could move, a couple hundred head perhaps if we had to hold them for a while. Maybe supplement if we needed to, if it wasn't quite the acreage we needed for that many. But some way, shape, or form, that's kind of what we've done. Another thing that I did, and we did on our place, is our state, through our Department of Ag, had what they called climate resiliency grants. It benefited me in that I had one of our larger pastures needed a new water system on there. So by applying for that, part of the terms of that grant was wildfire assistance. So I was able to put in a much larger than I probably would have stock tank, with the intent that if there is a fire, the fire departments can go to that for a source of water for the small trucks.
Yeah. Yep.
So that, and I don't know when they came up with that grant. I think just recently here in the past year or so. So we did that, and we're nearly complete with that project. We got the tank in now. We just got to do some fence work around it. So, which is good. I mean, it's kind of a win-win thing.
Yeah. And interesting point to bring up. I hadn't heard of that, so that's something folks should really look at. And then Laura, I know we're still, kind of getting through a cattle season here though too. What are some of the initial economic impacts that fire has had.
The fencing, I think, has been one of the bigger ones, and we talked about it a little earlier. The cost of fence, we're hearing people say $15,000 to $20,000 a mile. The fences have to be put back where they were. They have to be a certain type of fence. There have been some relief given. FSA and USDA have worked with us on, to make some exceptions on a few things to try to help people get those done. We know that people have had to make really tough decisions to sell cattle or to move them out of state while they got to go find grass elsewhere. There are a number of eastern Nebraska ranchers who will bring cattle to the sandhills to graze this time of year. They're not doing that right now. I think those things are big. We have talked to producers over the past month or two who've told us we're just getting out to be able to survey some of the damage in the more remote parts of our ranches. There was tremendous amounts of wind after the fires, and the number of water tanks that have sand in them, the damage done to those tanks, many of them will have to be replaced, the solar panels that powered them. So the things that I think people maybe didn't think about, you've got to have hay, you've got to have that infrastructure put back into place, but not knowing what damage maybe was underneath that you didn't see until you were able to clear it out. We, in getting both a declaration from a presidential declaration from FEMA and the secretarial designation, there were 5 primary counties that were impacted. Garden County, Nebraska, over 60% loss from infrastructure, grasslands, and then 17 contiguous counties were included in that. So there was a big area that there will be long-term, will those cattle come back? What will that look like? And we love seeing the pictures from the producers there as it's rained some, and the grass is getting green, but it still takes time. Those ecosystems are pretty fragile. And so I think those are the unmeasured impacts, plus the mental toll that we won't ever be able to quantify. But those are probably the most significant things that we're hearing people talk about right now.
And let's maybe talk about that longer term impact. We're seeing the support, the hay come in, fencing supplies, the water donations, the food. But it seems in the face of natural disaster, that's when that aid comes. But for so many years, it's going to take some time for these rangelands to recover and come back, for herds to come back into these areas too. We have a drought everywhere across this nation and a low cattle herd. What are those conversations like, and the longer term impact that wildfire truly has, more than just rebuilding fences and looking at the scars on the land? Because rebuilding that rangeland can take some time. Mm-hmm.
I remember within a couple of weeks of one of the big fires, I had the pleasure to fly with some of our emergency management out to talk to some producers, and we were getting these interesting calls saying, well, fire's healthy. And I'm like, not like this. It's not. This is not the way you need to use it. Because plenty of people use controlled burning. It's a great tool. And in part of the areas where these fires happen, many of those producers did use it. Just wasn't the way it was supposed to happen. And so, we are fortunate to work with a lot of partners from USDA, FSA, NRCS, but also, university extension professionals who have spent their whole lives working on landscapes and grasslands and those healthy ecosystems to say, here's the way you should be doing this. Here's the management tools, trying to provide community forums where people can come and just say, this is the challenge I'm having today. Because, we always say around our office, it's not if the next disaster is going to happen, it's when. And I really commend the leadership in Nebraska Cattlemen. We have a 501c3 disaster fund, and we've raised over $2.2 million in this round of fires, and we're going to give 100% of that out to people impacted. Nothing's ever going to make it all okay. Nothing's ever going to make it right. But to help people be able to see, and the states that have come to say, what can we do? But it's a long process that takes some time.
Yeah. It is. And of course, you're saying where we're at, we're sand. Most people don't think of Colorado as sand, but we're in the sand hills. We don't have the big ones you do, but it's, when it totally denuded a lot of that country, all of a sudden you got fences that are covered up. They didn't get burned up. They got covered up with blowing and drifting sand later on. Now you got a whole new dilemma. Do you try to use heavy equipment and remove that, or you just build a new? I mean, we've got a lot of our own personal pastures, and many around us were at one time they were farmed. Dirty 30s came along, everybody left So I have these mounds straight line through a lot of my pastures, which used to be a fence, which was covered up, and then they left it, they turned into go back grass, they call it. So I've seen a little bit of that. I saw some of the pictures that Lower was referring to about, your sand drifting there was much worse than we had. We had some locations that did that, but it just brings up a whole new scenario of issues that suddenly you got to deal with on that.
Yeah, Kenny, you got fellow producers here in Colorado that have permits up in the mountains as well. Mm-hmm. And it is always interesting to watch a grass fire, because those are scary. They move so fast. And then we look at management of our forest lands as well, particularly national forests. And as we kind of bring this into a discussion on how, because as you pointed out, we're never going to prevent fire. It's a part of nature, but there's some management tools that, and especially when we look at our U.S. forest land and the beetle kill that we see across the West as well. So on the legislative side, we talked about disaster declarations and whatnot, but there has been quite a lot of conversations and legislative initiatives in Washington, D.C. To address wildfires, or maybe some forest management as well. What are some of those key things that are currently in play, and how do you have that conversation of, yes, we can't prevent fires, but maybe we could reduce that catastrophic impact? Because Dave Daly from California comes to mind, and the impact he had in losing his entire cattle herd to a forest fire. But I guess from the policy side of things, you have a unique perspective on that now too.
Actually, several of the things that I know the Colorado Cattlemen have worked through is trying to get initiated once again, because one time we did a much better job of managing our forest, and then they wouldn't even let them remove the beetle kill that you referred to, so that when they did get a fire, it was a hot son of a gun, because they had all that fodder for the fire to burn up. So they're trying to get some of these people to recognize that letting Mother Nature just run its course is not the best action. When you have the capability to go in there to graze it, to do select cuts, do some thinning, and manage those better to prevent these catastrophic fires that we've seen. Another entirely separate issue that we had to work through and started a number of years ago, and I think Tim Canterbury, who's now president of PLC, was instrumental in this, was access for the permittees to get in there, because they were being denied access. They're saying, you can't go in there. And they're saying, look, those are our cattle. We know the access routes in there. Let us in there, get our cattle moved out and deal with it. And eventually they got some agreements worked out, means to identify who really, truly, and honestly needs to be in there, and allow them access in to, at least if they did get a fire, to be able to remove cattle, move them on down out of harm's way. So that, like I said, that was kind of a whole entirely different thing than the initial work to get some proper forest management back into the equation.
And I know a large focus on wildfire maybe has shifted away from Nebraska and Colorado and still focused on LA.
Yep.
There's just a whole lot more people out there too. Yeah. How did the tragedy in LA maybe elevate the conversations of what Western livestock producing states and people who live out here are experiencing? How has that maybe helped with that conversation a little bit on fuel reduction management and grazing, maybe a part of that as well?
We had a similar situation, what they had in LA over by Boulder just a couple of years ago, the Marshall Fire. I mean, it moved through there, and I don't know how many homes were built, but it was pretty much the same thing. And at that time, it once again came back to, if they would have allowed some proper management in the open areas around there, And since then, the city and county of Boulder has said, well, maybe grazing is not such a bad thing. Get rid of that overstory growth that is the fuel for the fire. Another thing is too, and I've seen it somewhat, never used to see it, is now there will be from our local electric providers, they will do select areas. Okay, we know the wind's going to be whipping up 70 mile an hour today. We're probably going to kill power to certain areas because that's down power lines is what caused most of our fires.
Yep.
So they're doing more of that, and I never used to even consider that or see it or be aware of it. Now, suddenly they'll announce it. Just say, hey, forecast is we're going to have high winds. We're probably going to, if you're in this area, be prepared. We're going to kill power just so we don't have this happen.
Yep.
So some of that is going back to that, what they call the Marshall Fire up by Boulder, because it was a down power line there that started it.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I think that all of it is so tragic, but when it happens in an area where there's much more of a human impact, all of a sudden you have people who never think about wildfire and never think about what it's like to live in the West, and they know, but yet they don't think about that. And so I think all of that helps with public awareness. It's not the way anybody wants it to happen, but yet all of a sudden you realize there's a lot of tools people could use. And even when it comes to water conservation, like it's just like, hey, we got to have a way to fight these fires when they do happen. And so I think it just changes people's mindset to say we have a problem, we need to deal with it. And maybe it's not so bad to control some of these things that we know we can control.
So the two pieces of legislation currently that NCBA is advocating for, Nebraska Cattlemen, CLA, Colorado Cattlemen's, would be the Fix Our Forests Act and the Strategic Grazing to Reduce Risks of Wildfires Act. What are some of the key things that really stick out to cattle producers in this legislation, and why is it so important to have that unified support from the national and state level on these key issues?
I think the tragic thing about that we're advocating for that right now is the fact that we've been asking for this for so long because we understand it. And, there's becomes, I guess I'll call them greenie, there's people who call themselves environmentalists where they just let Mother Nature take its course, consequences be damned. Now they're seeing, oh, wait a minute, that's probably not the best approach because then they see the damage done, the time it takes to recover. One thing that really hadn't been talked about yet is the loss to wildlife. In our case, not so many wildlife were burned, but they were burned out. They moved out. Mm-hmm. I haven't seen antelope and deer in some of those countries now. I mean, I'm sure they'll come back, but they're gone. They moved out of there, and adios, guys. And if we can play on some of those things that normally we would not have had to rely upon and really stress, and look, you care about open spaces, scenic open spaces, and then show them a vision, which would you rather see, a forest that takes 50 years to regenerate, no wildlife dead, lost, or would you rather see something that's managed and has your values that you're advocating for yet? We can do both. Mm-hmm. And it's just, it's like pounding a square peg in a round hole to get that thought process across sometimes.
And you mentioned, obviously, you brought up Boulder. We discussed LA and kind of tying that all together. Do you think that we can make some positive movement on this type of legislation or putting a focus on grazing because of it? Or
I don't know if you're asking me to look in that crystal ball. I can't. I mean, when it comes to politics, especially, I'm not gonna. I would hope so. Yeah. I mean, I surely, truly, and honestly hope so because we do have new allies in this. So I'm hoping that maybe we can drag some of this across the finish line. But Laura, I don't know. From your perspective and your government out there, what you see. But
yeah, I think one of the ways is it creates these new opportunities to work together. We don't have federal lands in Nebraska. We rely on our neighbors in Colorado and Montana and California. We rely on them to help us in those areas. And yet we want to be their allies to say, we may not have the same challenge you do. Because our fires that have happened this year, especially, are all private lands. There was a little bit of state forest land in Nebraska that had some issues too. But figuring out how you go find those people to say, like, and you started off with this, we may not always see eye to eye, but we can all agree this tragic loss. And in places where there's higher populations, you're talking about the loss of people. Yeah. You're talking about the loss of their homes. They may never recover from that. And so how can the tools that we're using in agriculture help? And I think it opens the door to new conversations about technologies. I mean, we know we've had some of our senators talk about virtual fencing, things like that maybe there are ways that when we have these things come through, the infrastructure doesn't get as harmed because we can look to technology to say, what's out there that we can utilize and have assistance with. But having more people at the table to have the discussion is certainly not a bad idea.
Yeah.
Yep. And, we're kind of bringing it back to the producers on the ground, the livestock we care for along the way too. And we both pointed out this is an emotional issue. It's a scarring issue as well, not just on the landscape, but on the heart and the mind as well. We talk about mental health, and it's one of those things that folks continue to bring awareness to. But Laura, how important is it for folks to talk about this, or maybe some resources that you've seen on the state level for producers to be able to talk, whether it's at the cattlemen's meeting, just say, I'm not going through this alone, or maybe it's someone that can confidentially talk one-on-one about, those nightmares you're having at night, they were real, but we have a support system for you.
It's imperative. I am incredibly grateful for, I feel like every outlet that has been able to in Nebraska, when you look at, like, they might pin something to their social media homepage with a mental health crisis hotline. We try to share those resources front and center. We all know, and I think this is one of the reasons we love agriculture, we are a prideful group. We don't like to ask for help. Now's not the time to do that. Now is the time to ask for help. This is the time where when you are going through something really hard, somebody else has gone through it too. You have to ask people. You have to talk to them about it. And I think it has also created really fascinating partnerships with, in our state legislature, we'll have people that work with completely different organizations not related to agriculture, but they have a component where they have crisis counselors involved. And every stop we would make along the way to visit producers, those folks would call and say, can we deploy people out there? We don't have a huge group. Maybe someone had never been into their FSA offices. I've been just incredibly impressed with our, especially beef extension educators, who have acknowledged sometimes people just want to come in here and sit down and talk. Mm-hmm. All of you need to take time to listen. They've helped each other. They've taught each other that lesson. And I think it's just incredible. They're not necessarily skilled at doing it, but just being willing to say, I've got 15 minutes. I'll listen to you. Yeah. It's so important.
Yeah.
I don't think we can underscore that. And I'm not an expert on it. I can't speak to it. I haven't gone through it, but I can tell you, in talking to people, I would advocate every day that it's something that we need to have more resources towards.
Kenny, to circle back to you, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say about that. I mean, you have people who did not even want to seek assistance for fencing or hay, and by God, to go ask for mental health, that's a whole new dynamic that many of them never. I mean, these tough old guys, they've been through all this before, and to be in a situation to where they have suddenly lost so much all at once. It's a whole new dynamic for them, and they're overwhelmed. And I think you mentioned it, Laura. Just I'm feeling it, you're feeling it, and all of a sudden, it opens some floodgates. Sometimes there's always going to be those guys. They'll just tough it alone. Let's be a hockey player, and finish a game with no teeth. That's the mentality that we all are.
Yep. So my last question, Laura, you mentioned the 501c3 for disaster relief. maybe for an association that doesn't have that or a foundation. Most states do have a foundation. How important is it to maybe consider that in planning for the unexpected and how this truly, we all hope natural disaster doesn't happen, but if it's a blizzard, a fire, a freak storm, whatever it might be, just having that legwork done so people can make donations, because we know during times like this, the predators come out and they create these fake pages to try and get people to donate to funds that aren't even associated with the true recovery. How vital is that to have a foundation or work with entities to have these nonprofits so that aid is going directly to those who need it?
I would encourage everybody out there who doesn't have one to think about it. And I won't be apologetic about it, because I was a huge nag at Nebraska Cattlemen about, we have to do this, we have to do this. We stood our fund up a month before what we called the bomb cyclone hit Nebraska in 2019. We had ice blocks flooding from west to east. We had blizzards. I mean, the amount of tragedy, the amount of wild, just natural disasters that were happening. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't come up with it myself, nor did anybody else. I grew up on the Texas Gulf Coast, where hurricanes are our biggest natural disaster. I remember asking my dad about people who had been completely underwater. What did they do? Texas has a fund. I called Kansas Livestock, Texas Cattle Feeders, Texas Cattle Raisers. I had been in Colorado for many years in grad school and had worked closely with Colorado Cattlemen. What are you guys doing? And I think it is imperative. And I will tell you, it is a lot of work. We reached out to a local law firm. I said, help us draw this up. But at the end of the day, right now with this round of disasters, I made the comment earlier about 2.2 million. We have had people donate from 48 states and 5 foreign countries. Churches that have a fifth Sunday offering, the amount of people that want to do something and don't know what to do. And for us to be able to look those people in the eye and say 100% of what you give is going to help somebody who is affected. And I am so grateful. And I want to make sure anybody who watches this knows I am so grateful for anybody out there who gave. And the opportunity to give is always going to be there. So stand those funds up, and maybe you raise $1,000, maybe you raise $10,000. Every bit of that money is helpful to somebody. And I think people are looking for a way to make an impact. And call us, we'll help. Call those states that already have a fund set up. I know they'll give you their insight. I wish that our state had a bigger disaster fund statewide, but that's something that I think we can all work on too. How can those states help? What can we do to stand those funds up, specifically targeted for agriculture disasters?
Kenny, any last thoughts?
Just kind of along those lines, when we did see funds come in, like I said, I think it's wonderful that people step up and feel a need to donate, and it's amazing to see. Kids giving a couple bucks that they felt obligated. That when we did this, when we had the Heartstrong fire, I'll refer back to that. And there were so many. Wood fence posts was the biggest need, staples and wire kind of secondly. We tried to figure out how can we work through, try to keep the money locally. And we wanted to, support our local businesses. Hey, how many fence posts you guys got? And got them to cut us a deal, kind of stretched the money there, kept all that local the best we could. But just, once again, we worked with Farm Bureau. They had one established. So that helped. We just said, all right, we'll just use that. We don't need to recreate the wheel here. So if there is one, I'd say, maybe look around. Maybe there's one there that you could utilize, and it worked great, because that way they had a little bit of money already sitting there unused. We added to it, did the best we could with it. But like I said, I think once we saw the need, then we tried to spread it out and locate, because boy, it didn't take long to run the locals out of fence posts. So got some coming in. Tried to keep from getting price gouged, because there's always those, like you said, they'll take advantage of that situation. So we did that. And were we 100% successful in getting everybody that needed assistance with it? No. There just is. The need was overwhelming. But it was a start. We saw the need that we hadn't ever fully recognized that we need to delve into before. So we made some progress on. Now we have a permanent mechanism if we ever need to do this again, by which we can use.
And I think we learn the lessons. We all acknowledge we make mistakes in this, but the lessons we learn for next time are super important.
Yep. Well, I want to thank you both for coming and sharing the experiences that you've seen firsthand on the ground, gone through helping neighbors. And again, it's about helping neighbors and trying to be as prepared and hopefully try to prevent catastrophic fires. But we know Mother Nature, she's fickle sometimes.
Yep.
But thanks for sharing your experience with us here today. And hopefully we can get people thinking a little different about just preparing and maybe post-fire sometimes too. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lane.
And with that, friends, thanks for joining us here today. And thanks to our friends at the Noble Research Institute for joining us and helping bring you this conversation as well. Again, it's tough when natural disaster hits, but it's also heartwarming to see the support that comes in from fellow farmers and ranchers and those that want to help those producers succeed in the countryside as well. So if you haven't done so, make sure and subscribe to the Cattlemen's Call podcast, share this, and of course, we look forward to you joining us on our next episode. I'm Lane Nordlund. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to NCBA's Cattlemen's Call podcast with Lane Nordlund. For more information, visit ncba.org and make sure to subscribe to the podcast today.